Hi, everybody. I'm so grateful to have you here. Welcome to our Retrain the Dyslexic Brain graduate case studies. So if you haven't ever joined us before, we're grateful to have you here. We do these every other week. And so one of the reasons that we do these calls is because we are so proud of our clients and all of the incredible progress that they've made through the course of our program. But we're also here to inspire and offer hope to parents and kids with dyslexia, because I think that oftentimes you can be told that your child just has to deal with it. Like, this is something that will never go away. There's nothing that you can really do about it. You just have to have tools to help you to learn to cope. And gosh, that just couldn't be further from the truth. So any opportunity that we get to tell the real stories of kids that have made a humongous transformation, we take that opportunity every single time. So today we are going to be speaking about Wes, who is a 12-and-a-half-year-old boy. And he just made some absolutely incredible progress. So we'll not only talk to you about his data, but also his real life story. So Wes went from being 47% accurate in his phonological awareness to 88% accurate. His scores on the wide range achievement test 5 in reading went from the first percentile to the 47th percentile. His scores in spelling went from the 2nd to the 5th, and we'll talk about why that's such a statistically significant thing in just a minute. In addition, the words that he wrote phonetically went up to the 50th percentile. But his mom said, we had a lot of support before. It's just that he wasn't making progress. We were so glad that we found the program. We just wish that it would have been in 2nd grade. So I just want to give you a little bit of background on like who we are and what we do, so that you kind of have a context for our discussion today. So when we are talking about this data, everything that we are sharing is stuff that kids did at home. So we give this program to families, whether it is a parent or a grandparent. This is something that within 10 to 15 minutes a day that this child has done with their scores. So in Wes's case, his scores took him about 7 months. He's a little bit different in that he had a really severe case. And so it took a little bit longer for some of those things to happen for him. But a lot of our clients are able to go through the program within 4 months' time. And so these are things that we are giving to parents in order to do this within that time frame. So just so you have that for context. So before we get going into the data, I always think that it's really valuable to have this discussion about what the brain actually looks like for dyslexia. And I think, if you are a parent or a grandparent trying to get your head around this, seeing these brain scans is really valuable. So what you've got in front of you is actually an fMRI of 2 different brains. So the one on the left is a person who does not have dyslexia, and the person on the right is someone who does. And this is during a language task. So what's important about that is if we were to look at these 2 brains side by side during some other task, we wouldn't really notice anything that was wildly different. But if we said to these 2 people, hey, spell something. Hey, I want you to read this paragraph. Hey, I want you to write this essay. There is a very distinctive difference in how those brains are performing. And so you'll look over here to the person without dyslexia, and you'll notice that there's activity here in the back of the brain in an area that we call the occipital lobe, where vision is controlled. And you'll also see that over the sides, above the ears and the parietal temporal lobes, that there's also more significant activity. But when you compare that to the person with dyslexia, you see that there literally isn't activity here in this occipital lobe, and there's far less in the parietal temporal lobes. So I'm sure you're wondering, like, what does that do? So the eyes are up here, at the top of the image. And so let's just say that the word cat is in front of this person. For a typical person, I see cat, and that information goes directly back to my occipital lobe. I have activity here, so I know automatically what that letter is. My brain can process that. It'll connect it over to the auditory part of the brain where I can figure out which sound that is. So I have a very easy time, relatively speaking, to decode what those words are. I can spell them, I can read them. That's something that's pretty easy for me because my brain has activity in these language centers. But when I go over to the person with dyslexia and I see, gosh, okay, the word cat is here, and I'm going to take that in, and my brain has to figure out what to do with it. It's why a child might add letters in that don't belong, or they might omit letters that should have been there that aren't. It's the same reason why you might reverse a letter or you might write it backwards. There's just a misfire in how the brain is processing language. So here's the same kind of information, but this is within an EEG. Again, we've done this over thousands and thousands of studies, so we know exactly what this profile looks like. Here's a typical reader during a language task. Here's a reader with dyslexia during a language task, but look at what's possible. So when you actually teach the brain of a child with dyslexia to reconnect sight and sound, yes, it may overcompensate, but it is actually using the same parts of a brain as a typical reader, which is why the child can now read and spell as a result. And so just like once upon a time, we used to think that the world was flat, we used to also think that intelligence was fixed and that the brain is just what it is and you have whatever you're born with. And we know unequivocally now that that is just absolutely not true. The brain is a dynamic organ and it changes throughout life, even for adults, so we know that walking can have certain impacts on our brain. Learning new things can impact our brain. Gosh, they even did a study of London cab drivers where they asked them to memorize a map of the city. And so for a study, they looked at their brain before they had to learn the map and after they had to learn the map. And they found that there was actually increased spatial awareness and ability after learning those things. So we know that the brain is capable of change, and the brain is absolutely capable of change for a child with dyslexia. So if you've ever been told like there's nothing you can do to help this kid, it is just completely, completely false. So here's where we get to add this to a human being. Here is what Mama Michelle had to say about Wes's journey and their struggle and also their triumph. So we always believe that, it's great to hear the numbers, but how did it affect a human life? So for Wes and Michelle, they met us when Wes was 12 and a half and in the 6th grade, but they knew kind of early in elementary school that something was off. So Michelle said that kindergarten actually went okay. He was able to learn his letters, he was able to do math, and so there wasn't anything that was sounding off alarm bells. So then he goes to 1st grade and he's slightly behind. And so the teacher did make Michelle aware of that. Wes is slightly behind. He's not really progressing as well as other kids in the class with reading, but don't worry about it. Lots of boys have troubles with this. He's going to be fine. And then they make it to 2nd grade, and it was like full blown struggling. She said it was kind of like a slap in the face because she thought he was doing okay and like, okay, he's a little bit behind, but nobody in their family had dyslexia before. She didn't really know what it was. She didn't really know what it looked like for kids to have reading struggles. And so it was just kind of this big shock to find out that in 2nd grade, the wheels totally fell off the bus. He was expected to be reading, he was expected to be spelling, and it was very, very obvious that his brain was just not connecting letters and sounds really at all. And so she addressed this with the school. They were going to get him into testing, but as you know, if you've done that with your own child, that can sometimes take months and months to figure out like, okay, can we assemble a team? Can we collect the data? Can we test him? Can we get the results? And so for Michelle, that felt like a really too long of a process. And so she said, we're just going to opt to do private testing because frankly, the school just wasn't moving fast enough. So at that time when they were tested. He was diagnosed with dyslexia, dysgraphia, and he was also diagnosed gifted, which is very, very common. So if you don't know this, kids with dyslexia often have average or above average intelligence. And so there is this discrepancy between like, I am such a smart kid, and then I have this unexpected struggle in a significant way with language and reading. And so his handwriting was also quite difficult. And so he was given both of those diagnoses as well as the giftedness. So at that point, he was getting some support at school. They did create an IEP for him because it was so severe. He was getting pulled out multiple times a week, but that really wasn't making any progress. And so Michelle said, okay, I'm going to additionally support him with private tutoring. So they hired an OG tutor. OG stands for Orton Gillingham. It's one of the most common ones, and lots of kids have gone through it. So for Wes, he went for 2.5 years, twice a week for an hour each time. So 2 hours a week for 2.5 years. And when he entered the program, he was still at the first percentile for reading. And so Michelle said he did have a lot of support. It's just that he wasn't making any progress. And it felt bad because it made him feel so bad. She said it just hurt his little heart because he just couldn't do it. And I think that that's so common for so many of the kids that we see, is that it's not that they're not trying. It's not that they're lazy. It's not that they don't want to. It's that their brain literally can't. And so, he had gone through several years, at the time that they diagnosed him, he was in the second grade. We met him in sixth grade. So third, fourth, fifth, and sixth. So 4 years of really, really trying and just not getting anywhere. And so Michelle said, my husband and I really felt like we had to make sure that we had done right by him. He needs to be able to read in order to be able to survive. So if we haven't tried everything, then we haven't tried hard enough. And so that's really the attitude and the belief that they took into this. Like, I get it. We've done things. They haven't worked. Wes still isn't growing. And she said, I just cannot send him out into the world unable to read. I feel like reading is a basic right. Even for his safety, he needs to be able to read a contract. She was joking, but she said, or not sign his first child away. Like, it's so fundamental to survival and life that we just felt like we couldn't not give him this opportunity. So Michelle is a nurse. She's got a nursing background. She is not an educator, but we asked her in an interview, and you're welcome to watch her interview on YouTube as well. But we asked her, like, how was it for you being a nurse, not having an education background? How did you find it? And she said, oh gosh, it was super accessible and it was very well supported. She said, unlike sending him to the tutoring center where I really didn't know if he was any better or worse for it. Like, he went in there, he came back out. I asked him, how did it go? He gave me like very minimal answers. She said, I actually appreciated being very directly involved in the process. I saw with my own eyes, like, when he was able to start collecting and connecting letters and sounds. I saw what it looked like when he was starting to be able to spell. And it was actually kind of fun to be involved in that process. And she said, really, part of me feels like I was taking on this process anyway, since he was really little, because of the struggles that he had in school. I was helping him every night anyways. And so it really didn't feel that different to me. She did say that, she felt we offered a lot of support, which made it feel really accessible. She got to go back and watch videos again if she didn't get something. But she said, really, when I think about it, it was a time saver. So for them, they had to drive 30 minutes to tutoring. The tutoring took an hour. Then they drove 30 minutes back. So she said that was 2 hours twice a week. So we were doing this for 10 to 15 minutes and we didn't have to drive anywhere. So it was actually less time than it took for us to go to tutoring twice a week. But she said, gosh, it just had such major changes for Wes. So beyond the test scores, she noticed significant changes in Wes's attitude and behavior. So she said the biggest difference was in his willingness to try. So she said, Wes is kind of a typical boy. It wasn't easy for him to sit down and do something that he didn't like, but he's doing that willingly. Like, he would sit down on the couch and say, okay, mom, it's time, and so it came to be something that he actually asked her to do throughout the process, which she said, I never imagined, that he would have that willingness. His willingness to write was infinitely more than it has ever been. She said, is it his favorite thing in the world to do? No, but she said it's just infinitely more. It's not a fight like it was. And, she said one of the fun things that he said at the end of the year, they did benchmark testing at his school where they were testing reading and writing. And he got done at the end of the day. And she said, well, how was it? I said, Mom, we did the reading benchmark test and it seemed kind of easy, which she said, oh my gosh, he's never said that before in his life. Even when we started the initial baseline assessments for this program, he was in tears almost the entire time. So to have him finish his school testing and say that it was easy was just like night and day difference. She did say that he really emotionally matured a lot. So before, he was really kind of a perfectionist. If it wasn't exactly right, he was really afraid to put things down on the paper. But not only has his reading skill and his writing skill improved, but his resilience and his ability to give himself a little bit of grace really, really changed. So we talk a lot about how mistakes actually grow your brain. And so she really felt like that helped him a lot. It was really exciting to be able to start working on words. It's been really great. And we just wish that we would have found it in second grade. She said, I was really happy that we could find something that got him out of his bad self-talk spiral. And we showed him that he is a reader and a writer. So that was another thing that she celebrated on that video that you can see is that he self-declared like, yeah, of course I'm a reader, Mom. Yeah, I'm a writer. Of course I can do that. And so just the self-belief and the confidence for a kiddo who was really, really feeling badly about himself was life-changing. So she said we were looking at any and all options, and Retrain the Dyslexic Brain ended up being the thing that made a huge or a big difference. He's made a lot of progress. And this program made it a cohesive little package that actually helped change his brain and make things make sense in a way that they haven't before. We were really grateful for this program. So let's take a look at his data, and I want to walk you through like what do these scores mean and why is it such a big deal? So again, we talked about this overview, but as we take a look at this phonological awareness assessment, this is really where things massively break down for kids with dyslexia. So phonological awareness is your brain's ability to hear sounds and be able to manipulate those. So you can see that when he started, he had 22 errors. So over half the test was incorrect. His brain really, really at 12 and a half years old was struggling significantly to do this. And within, again, that 7-month interval, he went to the 88th percentile, only making 5 errors. I'm sure by now he's at 0 and has 100% accuracy, but he was able to make such a significant change in this, absolutely reorganizing how his brain was able to hear and respond to those sounds. So maybe it's been a while since you've talked about statistics, but I want to teach you a little bit about educational statistics and why these scores for Wes are so humongous. So what you're looking at is the normal distribution curve, and this red line in the middle is the 50th percentile, or what we would consider average. And then you've got these lines that go down from the mean and they go up from the mean, and we call those standard deviations. So anytime that you're looking at a child's growth in an academic year, researchers have actually studied how much growth is typical. So let's just say the kid starts first grade and they end first grade. We know that that rate of change, or that average growth, is a 0.3 of a standard deviation. So if we made it a full standard deviation, it would be a 1.0. This 0.3 is what a typical kid would grow in an entire school year. So you start 4th grade, you end 4th grade. You start 7th grade, you end 7th grade. So we expect that all kids are going to grow. What's probably true for a kiddo with dyslexia is that they grow less, and they're making minimal to any progress year after year. So consequently, you're looking for an intervention that is going to, what we call, close the gap, that's going to give us more statistically significant progress. So if you make a moderate statistical significance, that means that your data has jumped a 0.5 or a half of a standard deviation. But if the program that you're using is statistically significant and it makes what we would consider statistically a huge jump in the data, we know unequivocally that this intervention had a positive, statistically significant impact. It moves a 0.8 or higher. So almost a full standard deviation. So let's take a look at Wes's data and what that actually looked like for him. So this red dot here represents where he started at that first percentile. This is what would have happened if Wes would have grown as much as a typical kid would have grown in an entire year. This brown one represents if Wes would have made statistically significant growth in this program for reading, meaning we know unequivocally that the program had a positive impact on him, he would have grown to here. But Wes actually moved 1, 2.5 standard deviations from where he started within 7 months, which is just absolutely incredible and unheard of. So like if you're talking about closing the gap, that's what we mean. So we're not just talking about making a little bit of growth. We're talking about how do we move this child along as far as humanly possible so that they can close the gap between themselves and their peers. So when we look at spelling, it had a similar result as well. Spelling typically does develop more slowly than reading. So we saw that in Wes's case. However, he started here at the second percentile. And if he would have made that full year of progress, he would have made it to here. Statistically significant would have been to here, but Wes made it to the 5th percentile, which when you look at the numbers, you're like, okay, he went from the 2nd percentile to the 5th percentile. That doesn't seem like a lot. But when you look at this percentile rank down here, you can see that to go from the 2nd to the 5th percentile is nearly a standard deviation of growth. So it is actually very statistically significant. In addition, he had several more words that were just 1 letter off. And had he had those correct, it would have put him at the 50th percentile for spelling. So just a little bit more practice with those spelling patterns and he would be right here at average with his peers, again, within 7 months' time. So I think when we look at this data, it would be remiss for us to not celebrate Michelle throughout this process. So yes, we told Michelle exactly what to do. Yes, we coached her through 100% of the way, but this is absolutely a partnership, and this would not have happened if it weren't for Michelle. So Michelle was truly an advocate. She wasn't willing to accept that the less than vibe that was being offered for her son. She knew that he was bright. She wasn't willing to give up. She didn't know if it was going to work. She said, but if I didn't try everything, then I didn't feel like I did a good job as a mom, and I cannot send him out into the world without basic reading and writing skills. And she said over and over again, I just had to make sure that I did right by Wes. That's my job as his mom. And so if I haven't tried everything, I haven't tried hard enough. And I think that attitude and that belief is what carries you through when it's hard. Yeah, I would say for most of you, you absolutely have probably done one intervention or several that may not have worked. But if your child still doesn't have the result and they still aren't thriving and they still aren't reading, I think there's a big question of like, am I really okay with that? So she said, gosh, it would have been great if we could have found this in 2nd grade, but we were really, really happy that we could get him something that actually moved the needle and completely changed the way that he was talking to himself, and massively changed his confidence. So I think a question that we get a lot is like, is Wes's growth typical? When we were talking about those standard deviations, we said like, this is how much an average kid grows in a school year. This is what we know is statistically significant. Our average kiddo in the program is double that. And so why does that happen? It's because we actually go back and we reorganize how the brain is functioning for language. And so herein lies the data of what happens when you change how the brain is functioning. So if your brain is misfiring before and it cannot hear sounds and it cannot connect letters with it and it doesn't do that automatically, you're going to continue to struggle. But when you can actually teach the brain how to do those things, we see this in client over client over client over client. And I will say that it can't happen if the family doesn't show up to do that 10 to 15 minutes a day. But so long as they do, and we ask every single one of those families, are you sure? Are you sure? Can you do this? And they all say, yes, absolutely, because these results really, really matter to us. So if you are curious and you want to dig more into educational statistics, there's a citation down here at the bottom. John Hattie has done meta-analyses, which means like studies of the highest impacts on student achievement. But you can see like these effect scores are like 1.3, 1.2, 1.5. We're consistently seeing like twos and a halves. And so we're just super, super proud of the data that comes out of this program. So again, from a philosophical standpoint, like why would it matter that you try to close the gap for your kiddo? It's because they're going to miss opportunities. So whether that means that they miss out on being in the same classes as their peers, or they miss out on being able to do sports or just be a kid in the evening because they're spending 2 or 3 hours a night doing homework. There are inevitably things that get missed by this continuing to stay in the struggle cycle. There are things current and ongoing that will be a struggle, and there's also future opportunities that change as a result of staying in the struggle zone. And so I think it's important to recognize that age 7, there is something that's called your self-concept that develops. That's where you realize that you are different from other kids that are around you. And so when that happens, kids can actually start that cycle of like terrible comparison and self-talk. I'm so stupid. I can never do this. I'm so dumb. We hear that all the time from families, and it's just absolutely heartbreaking because that creates struggle and suffering for everybody. I mean, that's not just a struggle for the child, that is absolutely a struggle for the entire family. So when you have the opportunity to switch that and you can massively change the performance of a child, especially in a shorter interval, it not only improves their academic performance, but it can increase their self-esteem and their confidence. It promotes better overall mental health, and it'll allow greater access to opportunities now and in the future. So it's just so vital. We can't say enough how important it is to really dig in and help these children to overcome as quickly as possible. So if you are someone who is out there right now and you feel like, oh, I think this is dyslexia that we're dealing with, I want to tell you about an opportunity that we do every other month where we have this dyslexia discovery workshop. This is a place where you can really dig in, do some assessments, and figure out for sure if your child is struggling with dyslexia. I think the sooner you know that, and the sooner you know what you're dealing with, the faster that you can put a plan in place to actually support them into having very different results. And finally, if you're also someone who's like, you know what? Michelle is me. That's me. I have been struggling with my child for years, and we have not been moving very much in terms of what the data looks like. And we do want to dig in and actually reorganize how the brain is functioning from the root cause. Then I would invite you to get on a complimentary call with one of our team members. So this is something that we offer to everybody. It's essential to us that we find out not only if your child has the issues that we can solve, but also that you are willing to kind of show up in the way that we need you to in order to make these kinds of gains, because we want this celebration for every single one of our clients, and we're kind of committed to making sure that that's happening. So if you need either of those things, please feel free to leave a comment in the chat. Please feel free to get in touch with our team. So the best way to message us is to go to support at Retrain. I just brain.com. And then you can get in touch with our team and say, hey, you know what? I really need a screener. I really need to be a part of Dyslexia Discovery Day, or gosh, you know what? We really need help. And we'd like to take one of those complimentary calls that you're talking about. So with that,